everyone. Thanks so much for making time to learn about the future and exactly what we think, what the future of learning is going to look like and what education needs to do to adapt, to evolve, to meet the needs of learners so that we can finally deliver on the promise of equity and ensuring that every person achieves their full potential, regardless of the family they're born into or the neighborhood they grew up in. So this is a fantastic panel where you have international perspective, you have leadership, you have an array of expertise that's going to be able to dive deep. And one of the notes that the folks at GSV give you is, make sure you actually get to the point of the panel. So we're going to actually start there. We're going to start with what the future of learning should look like, or specifically what kind of innovation the panelists, each of them, thinks is most needed for the future, so that we can actually just get to the meat of the bone. And by the way, I'm Bridget Burns, really excited to moderate for you today for the University Innovation Alliance. But I just wanted to first, I'll slowly introduce you to our fantastic panelists. But first I wanted to kick it off. I think, Lisa, would you think that you would be willing to start with, so Lisa has a fantastic background that includes expertise, most recently working at AARP, bringing innovation there, which, if you think about it, incredible potential. But right now, she's actually the interim provost at Southern New Hampshire University, which I'm sure all of you have heard about. And so your foray back into the academy after being a president, after doing all these things.
Happy to be back with you as the moderator at my first panel back.
I'm trying to deliver. So talk to us about what you think, what innovation are you most excited about in the future that you think will help with education?
Okay, good. So glad to be with my colleagues too. Juan, Pablo, and Mary, and Michelle. Wonderful. Happy to be with all of you. If I think about innovation as a framework or as a belief, what's most exciting for me is that we have to truly put the learner at the center. And for me, the innovation is obsess about the learner and then test the filter for any other innovation or technology to see whether or not it meets the learner's needs. Part B. Focus, I know you said that, Bridget, is that we need to reimagine together what we really mean by education and our systems. And so reimagine in an innovative way.
Well, so Chancellor Michelle Marks from CU Denver has an extensive background also where she is, she's also led a lot of innovation at another institution, and she was known, and one of her kind of distinguishing characteristics is cross-sector partnership, bringing in business, bringing in industry, and bringing in philanthropy and government, and also education. So I want to hear what you think is the most needed innovation in the future for higher ed.
Well, thank you for having me here, and hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to cheat and answer 2 times, but do it very quickly. The most needed thing quickly is making financial aid simpler, please. I think in terms of our affordability crisis, institution like ours, there's a lot of state aid, there's some federal aid, institutional aid, but boy, students sure are not able to access them easily, and I think that would be one innovation that would really transform access. And I agree with a lot of the things that you said in terms of, we like to say at CU Denver, we need to become a university for life. The way we talk about that is educating people from 17 to 117, but really reimagining the way that we educate to be a partner to learners and a partner to employers over the course of a longer lasting career in life.
Okay, I promise that we're going to get to ChatGPT and you're going to get to AI and all the fancy high-tech tools, but I do think that there's some substance there in terms of student-centered is actually radical for higher education because it was designed originally around the faculty, and at best it's designed around administrative burden right now. And then this idea of rethinking who the learner is, period, that itself is, I'd like to see that actually happen. Mary Papazian has been the past president of San Jose State University. I'm hoping that you can also talk to us specifically about the kind of innovation, a specific technology or innovation that you think is most needed.
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's great to see everybody here. I know we're opposite a session on ChatGPT, so kudos to all of you for being in the right place. I think when we talk about student-centered or learner-centered, it really starts with listening to the learner. And a shout out to Rep 4, one of the sponsors for this summit that really understands and is trying to turn the table. So I would start there. I think we're not going to decide what technologies should be here for the future, but we need to think about how we use these technologies, and ChatGPT is one of them. I think there are lots of ways we can actually use it to bolster the work we do in critical thinking. Because it's going to challenge, of course, our pedagogy and our faculty to be much more creative and engaged with our learners to really develop the skills and to use this new technology ethically. In AI and ML, I would just put out here real tools for personalized learning. When you talk about a diverse student population, whatever the age, they need to be I think, aligned with what their own interests and needs and strengths are, and personalized learning, personalized journey, immersive technology can all be an asset in opening up the institution from the traditional pathways we've always known to new pathways that we can only just imagine.
Juan, Pablo, thank you so much for joining us from Tech de Monterrey, which, for those of you who don't know, it's such a highly tech-enabled institution, was the leader to bring the internet to Latin America. Like, they were the first ones, and have really, what's interesting about Tech de Monterrey is it's not just higher ed, it's also like K-12, it's really an expansive and multiple campuses across the country. So would love to hear, as the rector for higher education, Tech de Monterrey, would love to hear your perspective on what innovation for you, given that P20 perspective, what's the thing that you think is most needed?
Thank you, Bridget. An honor to share the panel with all of you. Again, not a technology answer. I do think that the innovation that we need the most is innovate in new organizational models, in new institutional models, to create a diversity of institutions that understand the different needs of different type of students and that can best leverage the technologies that are being developed to solve the challenges. Because I do think that we tend to all be pursuing the same type of models, and that will not foster a good ecosystem of innovation.
Great. Thank you. President Megahed, thank you so much for being here. Perfect timing. So what we've heard from our colleagues is a need for us to think about being truly student-centered, reimagine who the students are, reimagine the design of institutions, and actually have the kind of technology that emerges to provide real personalized learning. So those are the kinds of things your colleagues have talked about. For you, given the unique position that National Louis sits in, and the sizable population of low-income, first-generation students of color you serve, is there a particular innovation that for you is like the thing that is preventing progress until it exists?
Well, I'm one of the people who actually thinks the higher education system has failed to design its experiences for those students, particularly low-income students. So I actually almost feel like we almost have to sort of start again because the system isn't set up for them to be successful. So what does that look like in terms of innovation? I mean, it really means like rethinking how you deliver and when you deliver and what it looks like when you deliver. And, so we all say we're student-centered, but we don't like really build the system to meet the needs of the students. So I think it's around that.
Okay, so I think we're in violent agreement about the need for more of a student-centered approach. But Lisa, I'm gonna come to you because the elephant in the room here, online learning, a lot of folks are doing it terribly. A lot of people still think that Zoom U is online learning, which it is not. And you work at an institution that's obviously, killing it at online. And so I'm not thinking about you. I'm actually thinking about your perspective of other institutions and what is needed in terms of ensuring that we actually deliver on the promise of what digital learning should be delivering, but is not, because people still have this very old school approach or thought about online. So what needs to happen? Is it policy needs to change? Attitudes? Like, how do we get from where we are to a place where it doesn't matter where you live, that you can have the quality education you need?
I think it's all of that, policy and attitudes and financial aid. And so what I will say, and Mary, I think you brought this to the fore as well, is that what I mean by obsessing about the learner and thinking about online learning, it's not obsessing about a platform first and saying scale is just about we'll reach a lot of people and we know within that population there'll be identity and intersection of identity and we're sure that it will work for some of them. It's driving your build with your core commitment to not just open up access, Nivine, I think you were going there too, but to drive equitable outcomes. So that is really about looking at learning experiences, and it's not one and done. So in my work at SNHU, certainly this was also true at AARP, it's that you have to be thinking about experiences and how they change, who your learners are, what their needs will be, and you have to be flexible enough. The other part for me is the secret sauce, which is not just what can be automated should be, but what is the essence of human connection, which matters in our life, across our life course. It matters for successful learning. And so where are we using humans in this system, even in very large-scaled models? Bridget.
Okay, so I want to go, I promise you, like I said, we're going to get to the high-tech stuff, but I do think it's important.
But humans are pretty high-tech, and
they are.
Lean into it enough.
So, Chancellor Marks, I'm interested in talking about one of the impediments to all the stuff that we're focusing on here, we're going to go deeper on, and that is the relationship between industry and government and higher education. I think that higher ed takes, granted, universities were built to last, not to change, and so resistance to change is a feature, not a bug. So they take a lot of the bad rap here, I get it. But there is also a real challenge in terms of how segmented our relationships are and how isolated we are. So I want you to speak to like a future state that needs to exist, industry, government, and higher ed actually moving us toward innovation.
Well, many of us think that we have relationships with industry, and in fact, we have a lot of one-offs. I mean, I think all universities, there's some really innovative exceptions up here, have many amazing one-off partnerships, but if the name of the game is to scale what we know works, to create the kind of diverse talent pipelines that our states need and that America needs and that the world needs, we don't really have systems for collaboration. There are a couple of good examples here. At my last job, we were part of something called the Greater Washington Partnership, which brought large companies together with the universities in an 80-mile area. And the problem at hand was Amazon Headquarters 2 was coming to the region and going to take up all of the tech talent. And the whole economy was going to fail if we don't produce more tech talent. So employers got in the game, universities got in the game, and lo and behold, states and regions then got in the game, and there was a model that's still operational today. I've seen very few examples of that kind of collaboration that can produce scale. I will also just talk briefly about smaller relationships, and especially at this conference, it makes me think about all of the startups here, and of course, there are startups that are doing great things. There are universities that would like to be doing great things with the startups, but the reality for I don't like to think of us as traditional, but I guess up here on stage, I might consider us the more traditional institution, University of Colorado, and we're not really equipped as traditional institutions to know how to partner well with the private sector, with startups. So part of it too is reflecting upon the kind of leaders that we hire and the way that we train our leaders. So there's a cohort of our first ever public-private partnership fellows sitting in the back where we're doing exactly that, trying to take leaders at different institutions and equip them with partnership skills and a knowledge about how to partner well, which I think is the first step towards really leaning into partnership in a different way.
Yes. Mary, so the folks at GSV, they would like us to have a little bit more tension. We need to spice it up a bit. This panel is a little bit too polite. And you are a past president, so I feel like you can be a bit more candid. You can perhaps call higher ed on its BS. And I am interested in, I know that yes, we need to partner, and there are other entities need to shift their behavior. But what do you think higher ed needs to do differently, especially as we think about partnership with industry and government? How do we need to actually operate differently if we're going to innovate and use the technology that we need to and scale?
Yeah, it's great to be a past president, and I really thank Lisa for the work she did at AARP. Thank you, Lisa. No, this is a really great question. I recently came off a year as chair of the Business Higher Ed Forum and working a lot with the Burning Glass Institute and other entities that are looking at the talent pipeline, the labor shortages, where there's oversupply, undersupply, overdemand, underdemand. And one of the things I learned from spending a lot of time with CEOs of various companies is that higher ed needs to flip the model from here's what we're giving you, and we know it, and we're going to produce what we want because this is what our faculty want. I'm a Renaissance literature professor. I'm as traditional as they come, but we really have to engage faculty differently, and not just the applied faculty in business and engineering, but the real core liberal arts faculty. What I learned really is that we have to go talk to business and industry and say, what do you need? And how can we produce that talent pipeline? But it's not enough to just do that. We then have to hold business and industry accountable for actually hiring what we produce that's been designed in combination with them. And some of the talk around skills-based hiring is all very interesting. It's a whole different conversation. But it seems to be at odds with what we're doing at higher ed. I actually think if we start with that real conversation, put a problem in front of faculty working with partners in industry around developing credentials or additional certifications in very specific emerging skills areas, mapping those on to curricula that already exists, then we can start to see change. But if higher ed isn't ready to really listen and be a little humble here and say, what do you need? Let us think about how we can produce it. It's not undermining our mission or rigor or values or integrity.
Okay. Juan Pablo, you previously worked at McKinsey before coming to Tech to Monterey. I think that's a really interesting background. And so you have an understanding of the strange space that we find ourselves in. There's a lot of venture capital, there's ed tech, there's philanthropy, there's a lot of folks in the room. And I'm interested if you can take on what needs to change from the venture capital perspective for higher education to be able to not have a series, to make sure that we're having products that are being pitched to us that actually solve our problems. What do you think is needed if we're thinking about expanding access truly at scale? Specifically, what do you think needs to happen in the venture world?
Good. It's a good question, a difficult one. But I do think that education and universities are ripe for disruption. We haven't changed much in the last hundreds of years. So it makes sense that there are many smart entrepreneurs and venture capital funds seeking how to disrupt universities. Some of them are looking to fundamentally replace us, if not all of us, part of what we do. And some of them are working on how to repair or help us to do better. And I think the approaches the relationship will vary depending on the mindset. I do think that we speak fundamentally different languages at some point. For me, I think the largest challenges are two. One is speed. We're very slow for what venture capital and entrepreneurs expect from them, and the speed in which they need things to happen. And the second one is the misalignment of objectives sometimes. So how do you make help them scale as fast as they want to deliver on the financial results that they expect and promise to their investors, but at the same time understand that from the perspective of universities, we're much more risk averse for the right reasons sometimes for the wrong ones. So I think it's language and alignment of incentives, the way that we need to work better, to truly understand what are the challenges that the universities have, and for us to understand how to better leverage their capacities, which are different from us, and to see not entities that are competing, but that can be actually complement each other.
Great. Before we get to the portion that I have a series of questions that were actually generated by ChatGPT, I am not kidding. You think I'm kidding, I'm not kidding. It's gonna get fun and spicy. Nivine, I wanna go to something that might not seem like completely down the middle, but I swear it is, and it's about failure. Because we're dancing around that universities have a certain value system that makes them adverse to failure, adverse to risk, and their inability to dance with that makes it so that we move super slow and we aren't probably putting as many shots on goal as we need to. When you and I were talking, what I heard from you that I've literally never heard, and I talk to university presidents all the time, is a physical example of how you make failure okay at your institution. Can you share about what you do with every new employee orientation and the get out of jail free card? Because I think I think everybody needs to replicate it.
Sure. Well, I'm fortunate to serve as the president of a university that almost went out of business. When I first came in, the questions were we going to survive, or were we going to merge, or were we going to even make it? And as part of our reinvention and our re-envisioning, one of the things I realized was that there was paralysis across the institution, and everyone was terrified of making any decisions for any reason. And when people in their areas would come to me and say, the regulations have changed and we've got to change, these rules to do that. And I'm like, well, you had that area, right? And they go, yeah. I go, well, we'll change them. And they're like, I can change them? Are you sure? Don't I have to make sure all these other people agree? I'm like, no, you have to keep us in compliance. So realized there was some endemic issue. And I started, it sort of just emerged that I was going to every orientation of new employees and talking about what we were trying to accomplish and where we were going and what our mission and vision was and how we needed to work together. And one of the things what I realized was I said to them, look, any institution that fails to make decisions is on the path to demise. But if you're willing to make decisions, even if the decisions are wrong, we can fix that. You cannot fix the indecision that happens. So I realized pretty quickly people were afraid of what would happen when it would fail. So we came up with this idea of get out of jail free cards. And at every orientation, I told everybody at whatever level they were at that they were hired to make decisions. They were hired to make decisions on behalf of the institution and in support of our mission. And that I never wanted them to pass the buck if they couldn't get a hold of their supervisors or whoever, because they were there to make decisions to improve the university. What was really funny was my senior leadership were like, you are going to create chaos and havoc. The institution's going to fall apart. I'm like, it's already fallen apart. So we did this, and I gave him and I said, and if any supervisor comes up to you and goes, oh my God, that was a bonehead decision. Why did you do that? You pull out that card and you say, I made the best decision on my judgment on behalf of our students, on behalf of our mission, and I'm sorry if it was the wrong one. And I said, 99% of the time, if they're wrong, we can fix them, but 95% of the time, it will be right. Well, we developed a culture that is very comfortable making decisions, and I would over and over emphasize that our success is built on a mountain of failure, not on a mountain of success. It is built on the corrective actions we take from every failure we make. And what's funny is, to a T, when I ask them at the end of my orientation, okay, what do you take away from today? And they would all say, I am so relieved it's okay to make a mistake here. So you talk about it as higher ed. I'm telling you, it's universal. And people need to know it's okay. I've also for years said, can we celebrate our most colossal failure? I want you to know no one's willing to participate in that yet, right? But so every year I try to come up and go, look, this is what I think was the stupidest decision I made this year. This is what I learned and why. And I want you all to give me a round of applause for it. So we're trying to push it.
So I thought that was important. So we've heard that it has to be more student-centered. Personalized learning has to really be delivered, the promise of it, not just us dangling the idea. And this idea of changing our relationships with external partners and our relationship with failure, those are all going to be necessary. So now let's get to the actual meat, which is around technology. And specifically, there are people who are not being served by your institution or any other right now. And there are millions of people who are being left out. And so what are the specific actions that you think need to happen for us to be able to truly deliver? Lisa, in particular, take off your Southern New Hampshire hat. Think about global higher ed and specifically what needs to happen in the future of learning. What does it need to look like so that any person, regardless of where they're born, are going to be able to experience this potential life-changing experience?
So to me, it does go back, Bridget, to one of your questions. I don't know if this was one of your AI questions that you just asked me. It is. But it's been talked about here, which is, it's not just about partnerships and alignment. It's about really not just the buzzword of co-creation, but really believing in co-creation and collective impact. I think that has to happen to fulfill this promise, so that we're working together with innovators, testing and learning together, not just buying a product that we hope is a plug-in to something that we're doing, and that we are having government. I mean, I was in a car on the way over talking to a longtime colleague I worked with when I was at AARP. Think about this. The DOE and the DOL are separate departments in our government, and yet we are all sitting here talking about skilling and unlocking workforce opportunities. So things have to change systemically, and we have to be vigilant about affordability, low cost, And we also have to foundationally believe that everyone can learn, is a learner, and that we have to meet them where they are and unlock those opportunities. So we got to stop whatever goes on in our minds about segments of students. Go from data, but don't make assumptions.
I like it. So Chancellor Marks, I'm interested in going into this idea of adult learners and people not taking them seriously and not treating them like they are actually the center, and their relationship with technology. In general, I think that CU Denver is such an interesting institution because you really are in the center of everything, and you're rising up to meet the needs of learners who don't yet know they are learners. And I'm wondering about any ways that you need technology to evolve for you to achieve scale. Where are you running into hurdles?
We're running into hurdles everywhere. During the pandemic, when we all had to do online learning overnight, what was interesting is that we have 3 large parking decks on our campus, which is downtown, and if you walk over to them at night, from where I live, you can see into the parking decks, and there were lots of cars in those decks when there were no classes on campus. And they were our learners, who many of whom live in homes that can't get access to, they don't have Wi-Fi access in their house, or they have houses where there are 2 bedrooms in their apartment and many brothers and sisters. Half of our students are first generation in their family to go to college. And so thinking about what technology enables, but also the complexities of relying on technology for those who don't have. So I would say that the first thing is to think a lot about the pros and cons of technology and how we can truly make education equitable for all. That shows up in other ways for CU Denver. I'm actually looking at our business school dean right here, who has the vast majority of his learners are now online and they're adult learners. We educate people in rural areas we're in an urban area, but we educate lots of teachers in Colorado in rural education desert areas. So thinking about how we can use technology to create greater reach in high demand professions. I think 11,000 out of our 15,000 learners are taking classes now in multiple modalities. Those are not stratified either online or on the ground. They're taking some classes online, they're taking some classes online, they're taking some classes that are hybrid. So I think, as you said, it's really being able to use an ever-changing technology, which will continue to change, to meet the needs of every learner where they are, how they need it, in a way that they can absorb and learn.
That's helpful. Mary, so you're getting a ChatGPT question, which is, what role can virtual and augmented reality play in creating immersive and interactive learning experiences that help students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills? I feel like that was a good question that ChatGPT came up with.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm actually, the buzzword of 2022 was the metaverse. I think everybody's heard of it, and it really is about immersive technology, AR and VR, creating a immersive space that has initially been used for gaming. And I think if we take gamification and the experience of gaming, which is through an immersive process, there are so many strategic and other kinds of decision-making that have to go on through a gaming process. The idea of gaming and gamification in an immersive environment for learners, I think, has tremendous power. And my view is that this kind of technology is more powerful in the learning space than it is even in the gaming space. I'd really like to see it, and I think it opens up again to a more inclusive environment. Think about identity for a minute, and think about how our diverse learners come into our traditional institutions and have to negotiate their identity. But when you put them in a different environment with technologies that allow them to create their own identities, they call them skins in the metaverse, for all you gamers out there, that gives them tremendous power to explore different ways of thinking about themselves and how to interact in the world. And when you add that to a kind of a personalized journey, I actually had a crazy idea for some new technology that I'll probably never do, but it has to do with creating a gamified experience of helping our first generation learners navigate the hidden curriculum through using immersive technology. And by the way, ChatGPT, they'll only get a B on an exam because that's their level of writing right now, but we'll see where it goes.
I feel like you got all the buzzwords in there in that one too. So anyone whose bingo card had scale on it, that's where we're going next. Juan Pablo, I want to talk about scale in that Tec de Monterrey is serving so many more students than other institutions, and you're doing it while you're dealing with them all these grade levels across all over the country. And I'm wondering about this, so it's the idea of size and scale. People think that's an impediment, but there's something I've noticed about what you all, it's your philosophy about the role of the faculty and how you bring them in. Can you talk about that and what others should learn from Tech de Monterrey if you want to drive innovation? Don't act like your faculty are the problem.
Thank you. Just to give you a sense of the scale, we have 90,000 students distributed across 26 campuses. These are degree-seeking students, plus 140,000 lifelong learners, and we go all the way from middle school to PhD students. We have 2,000 full-time faculty members and 7,000 adjunct faculty members. And as you were saying, many people see faculty as the first block that it's preventing change, and in our case, we needed to flip that around. We have been working a lot with them in many different ways. First, convincing them that it's their job to innovate and that they, by innovating, they can be a better server for their students. We also need to support them. We have centers for teaching and educational innovation and the use of technology in education in each of our campus. We give them grants. Each year, they can apply to get small grants, $5,000, $10,000, to redesign their course, and then those that work, we actually celebrate them and scale them, and they get a lot of credit for that. And create a culture, as you were saying, around innovation. It is expected of them. It's also embedded in the evaluation process. We don't have tenure in Mexico, but something that is similar to tenure. It's the elements of innovation is embedded as part of it. So if you do all of that, you suddenly have 9,000 people thinking about how to innovate and how to best use technology. And we have a lot of bottom-up innovation, also top-down innovation, but even the top-down innovation needs faculty to adopt them and leverage it and drive it. So I think it's key. And I don't think in the near future technology will replace faculty, not at least in universities like Tec de Monterrey. And it needs to be driven and by them for this to work.
So we're dancing with the digital divide, we're dancing with augmented VR learning, we're also thinking about real scale and seeing all the members of our campus community as part of the partnership to be able to get there. Nivine, I want to go to how can technology be used to ensure, there's like this idea that, you get a degree approved, and then it's so difficult to get it changed, right? Theoretically, in people's minds. And so we're really rigid in what we offer, and it is 20 years behind, which, 1986 was a great year, great vintage, but time for us to offer degrees for things in the future. So how can technology help us provide education that is adaptable and flexible to the needs of learners and workers? Are there ways that you can see technology being a key part of that?
Well, I think any innovation that happens in education will end up being mediated by technology. It not only lends itself to scale, but it lends itself to sort of being able to develop things relatively quickly and to change them as you need to. So how will technology help us to do that? I'm not sure specifically how it'll end up working to help us to design things differently. I do know that we have to be able to leverage technology in the whole ecosystem as we think about how we bridge higher ed institutions with industry and with government. That technology can be one of the connectors as well as one of the adapters that helps us to scale those kinds of initiatives.
So I want to go, Lisa, before we go to one of our final questions is I want to talk about the bias inherent in the algorithm, right? If you, like Candace Teal gives the example, if you Google for the World Cup, who won, it's always the men's World Cup that comes up, right? So there is an embedded bias. So how are we going to, if we're going to use ChatGPT, if we're going to use technology, what needs to happen to ensure that we can check against that bias in some way?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Bridget, because I think it is, we're going against bias that's built in over time. So as whether it's a ChatGPT or any other aggregator, they're aggregating, as you're saying, off of content that was not, in most cases, developed as inclusively as it should have been. And so you can't bolt it on. I guess what I would say is the challenge, and so I appreciate if others have answers here, is you can't bolt the DEI in or the bias or wring it out after the fact. For me, a couple of things. One is that we have to be sure right now is the large language models, which are massive right now, and they're exponentially every day getting bigger, that those who are contributing content, that we have a very diverse universe or communities of people who are putting that content in. But then also we can't just let whatever comes out the other end be the answer. So I think it does get back to the systems we use that are human systems that help us evaluate the information and evidence that is coming from algorithms against our mission mandates. And that's hard work. But that's what we're trained to do in education too, right? Like QA, critical thinking work, those are kind of durable skills I think that we have as educators and that we educate people for. But it's a big problem. There's a risk that more people will be left behind if we don't attend to this now.
All right, Chancellor Marks, in the future of a degree in a degree optional world, so that's where I'm going. That's my last thing on my bingo card. We can't be talking about education and using innovation if we're not acknowledging that there is a heavy dose of skepticism about what we do and whether it's valuable, right? So I'm still optimistic about higher education. I'm wondering if you can speak to how you see that. How do you see us dancing with that narrative or that underlying sentiment in a way that is productive and positive?
Well, I don't know if this is productive and positive, but I think the future of the master's degree could be dead in 10 years. So I mean, I think really the value of early education after high school and the creation of those durable skills, the creation of being able to learn and take that learning and apply it to something else useful. I mean, that skill set are the critical kind of skills that you take across careers that are no longer vertical, that are no longer, I mean, looking at resumes of people applying for jobs, and they probably had 3 jobs in the last 4 months, and that's okay somehow these days. So the whole notion of career is shifting, and so how are we going to teach our society to transcend across these kind of shifts in jobs? I think that will always be important. That generally happens at the undergraduate level. But what happens for the rest? I mean, if you look at even the conversation we're having about AI, next year it will be something different. The skills that are important today are not the skills that are going to be important in 4 years, or not the skills that are going to be important 4 years after that. So we have to fundamentally shift the way that we train expertise, and that has to be, again, back to that lifelong learning model. So I am very optimistic that higher ed will continue to be important. I'm baffled as to why we're having so many conversations about rerouting, even at this conference, higher ed alternatives. My hope and vision would be, how do we get those disruptors, rather than to try to disrupt, to say, how can we be better collaborators with higher ed? I think the real future is getting the innovations into higher ed as opposed to out of higher ed.
I love it. Mary, I'm hoping for the rest of you will go to the future of learning and help us land this plane in terms of walk us through into the future. Especially you've spent your career here, you have a sense of it. What do you think is it going to look like in 15 years? What's your hope in terms of the future of learning for this space?
Well, let me bring up something that we haven't talked about, and I think it's a behind-the-scenes sort of platform before we even can think about delivering on a very diverse, technologically rich future of learning, and that is having good digital platforms running our institutions. And so there's tremendous digital transformation that needs to happen at our institutions so that we can run efficiently and effectively and actually accommodate the new technologies as they come online. Because that's going to happen, and do it with attention to cybersecurity and all of those kinds of things. We don't do that as well as we should. So let me start there. The other thing, I think, in terms of the future of learning, I'll just build on what Michelle said. I think it's really important to think about the role of the humanities here. It's my pet peeve, because everything we've talked about when we're talking about lifelong learning, we're talking about understanding ethics and bias, really comes out of the kind of experiences that you see in the humanities. And I think those kinds of learners are going to be even more important, intersecting with skills in the future, because that's where the creative economy is going. That's how we're going to define it. And if you really want to be fearful, don't be fearful of AI. Think about the impact quantum is going to have on everything we do. We have no idea as a society how to even begin to absorb the impact that quantum will have, and we're getting closer and closer to that technology. In 15 years, it'll be old hat, and we may be living in a very different world.
Juan Pablo, you might get the last word here, which is the future of learning. So please give us your sense from your perspective.
Thank you. I do think that education will significantly change in the coming decades. I think it will be less vocational. It will need to be focused more on our human values and what us as human can do better than the machines. So it will need to be about leadership, about courage, about working together, about redefining what type of world we want to live in. That said, I do think that technology will allow us for education to be more personalized, hybrid, and continuous across our life. But I think the what for of education is what will change the most, and that will have severe implications in what we do.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful conversation about the future.
Thank you, Bridget.